Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be giving this presentation to you today, and I can't wait to jump head first into the topic of the day. My sisters and I attended a one-room school for 8 years, and my mother, my mother-in-law, and my cousin taught in one. So the one-room school is close to my heart. What about you? I'm sure some of you attended a one-room school, and I bet a nickel that somebody watching taught in a one-room school. Over time, I've taken a less than scientific straw poll that indicates that over 75% of those who attended a one-room school have a thumbs up feeling about their experience. I wonder which thumb tells how those of you who attended a one-room school felt about your one-room school experience. Maybe I'll someday find out. Maybe this looks a little like your one-room school. Well, I want to be open to full disclosure. A good part of my talk is about my experiences, so there are lots of I's, me's, and my's in it. This being the case, I want to give you a chance to bail out before it's too late. If you stay, just ignore my narcissism and have fun. My first one-room school experience, it was September 1939. Having turned 5 in February and really angry, I was fuming and ranting to my mother. 2 of my 6-year-old friends, Buddy Clow and Luella Ford, that's right, Buddy Clow and Luella Ford, could go to our one-room Prairie View school, and I couldn't. It just wasn't fair. My mother, to her everlasting credit, listened, and she got Mrs. Ball, the teacher, to give me a trial period. With the bigger boys forcing Buddy Clow and me to have a chicken fight on the first day, and me calling a coconut a kitten ball on the second day, my trial did not go well. But at the end, Mrs. Ball told my mother that, quote, he's a mumble little devil, unquote. And I didn't hear the mumbled word. But little devil or not, I started attending Prairie View School for real the very next week. I'll tell you about that later. But first, let's look at 3 questions about one-room schools that seem to be begging for an answer. First, why did we decide to have them? The second legitimate question is, how were we able to have them? And of course, the third question is, how many were there? Well, let's take a look at the why. The people who settled the United States had simply bought into Jefferson's idea that a good education is the essential foundation to a strong democracy. And the purpose for the one-room school was born. Now let's take a look at the how. The how was answered by a government land ordinance brought into being by Jefferson in 1785. It provided for surveys that divided the land into counties, townships, and sections. And it contained a special provision that made all the difference in the world and created our system of free public education. I'd like to just show you a little bit about the sections in the counties and townships. A section is 1 mile by 1 mile, and a township is 36 sections, 6 miles by 6 miles. Counties are 9 to 30 townships. And Jefferson's special provision read as follows. There shall be reserved the lot number 16 of every township for the maintenance of public schools within the said township. So it was called an education section. And our Prairie View School, the school I went to, was a part of Nixon Township and was supported by the revenue from the education section. Because of the people of the townships voted to have a school, decided where it was to be built, and controlled its use, a deep sense of community developed around these one-room schools. And the resulting bonding had a tremendous influence on the development of this nation. Well, let's take a look at the how many. When I walked in the door of Prairie View School for the first time in September 1939, I thought I was one little kid entering first grade in my unique little school, one-room school. As I'm sure you know, Prairie View School was not unique. But how many other one-room schools do you think there were in my county? DeWitt. DeWitt was 25 miles by 15 miles approximately, and it was one of the smallest counties in the state. Well, the small gray arrow on this map of DeWitt County inside the blue outline shows Prairie View School was one of the 7 one-room schools in Nixon Township, the blue outline, and the small orange squares that you can see on this map show all the 90 one-room schools in DeWitt County. So my little county had 90 one-room schools. Now let's take a look at the state of Illinois. There are 102 counties in Illinois, and there are about 100 one-room schools per county, as we've just seen, 90 for DeWitt. So about 10,200 one-room schools in the state. What about the nation? At the peak of the one-room school phenomenon, it was estimated that there were over 250,000 one-room schools in the United States. My little unique one-room school indeed. Well, let's move on for a minute into a little history about a special thing in the United States, the Little Red Schoolhouse. Let's take a look at some Little Red Schoolhouse history. Just after the Civil War in 1865, people learned to make cheap but good-looking red paint. Called it Venetian red, and it was made out of ground up iron ore. It was found easily, and something easy to find on a farm. You guessed it, buttermilk. And the communities mixed the buttermilk and the ground up iron ore and made Venetian red paint and started painting their one-room schoolhouses red. It caught on quickly, and a well-known newspaper said, next to the flag, the Little Red Schoolhouse is one of the most significant symbols of our country. But before the Little Red Schoolhouse got a good head of steam, an influential lady, I'm not sure it was the first lady, said that no matter if red paint is cheap, we should paint our schoolhouse like our house, not like our barn. And so ultimately, only 2% of our schoolhouses in the United States are reportedly to have been red. However, this popular icon was not to be disposed of so easily and became the impetus for a Little Red Schoolhouse song in 1922 and a Little Red Schoolhouse movie in 1935. I'd like to play just a little of the Little Red Schoolhouse song for your enjoyment. In the little red schoolhouse, with my book and sleigh. In the little red schoolhouse, I was always late. I want to be back there in the days of yore. How I'd stand right up there and holler, 2 and 2 are 4, when we should have been learning about the golden rule. Our little hearts were yearning for the swimming pool. Why, we could hardly wait for school to let out. The moment that the bell rang, we'd run and shout, oh gee, I want to be in the little red schoolhouse. So what about the one-room school teachers? Oh, just a remark before we leave it about the Little Red Schoolhouse. When you think all about it, it's no wonder that a Secretary of Education would later use the Little Red Schoolhouse as a symbol for the government's No Child Left Behind program. But what about the teachers in the one-room schools that were built across the nation? Let's open that discussion by showing this photograph of a one-room school class in 1943 and asking, what do you notice about this picture? Some of the things people notice and the questions that result are, well, the teacher is a woman. Was that usual or unusual? Or the teacher looks very young. Were there a lot of teachers that young? Or, hey, there are only 10 kids in this class. Did most of the schools have this few kids? And a question they didn't ask, but one I definitely know the answer to was, some say the one-room school teachers were heroes. Was this teacher, Cherry Jackson, a hero? If so, what made her one? These observations suggest the following 3 questions about one-room school teachers, which I will answer as we go along. Why were there so many of them, first of all, and why were they mostly women? Why were they so young? And why were they heroes? Well, let's take a look at the first question. Sorry about that. At first I thought, what a coincidence. Both my mother and my mother-in-law were one-room school teachers. And so were my cousin Cherry and my good friend Evelyn and several other women I know. But then I realized that there were 100,000 one-room schools in the broader Midwest alone, and their teachers had to come from somewhere. And as we entered the 1900s, women, compared to men, were cheap to hire. Also, a lot of other jobs were opening up for men. Because of this, almost 85% of the one-room school teachers at that time were women. Well, why were they so young? And then I thought, all of my one-room school teacher friends were between 16 and 21 years of age when they taught. Why were they all very young women? And I think that perhaps excuse me here. I think this following rules for teachers will help you answer those questions. You're not to keep company with men older than your brother or father. You'll not marry during the time or terms of your contract. Women teachers who do marry or engage in unseemly conduct will be dismissed. And just as an addition, you must wear at least two petticoats. And before I make the remark about this, I'd just like to add one more rule to illustrate the double standards for men and women that were held at that time. A rule for men teachers. Men teachers may take one evening each week for courting purposes and 2 evenings each week if they go to church regularly. But it's pretty obvious they would not be courting another teacher. You wonder where these rules come from and who make them. But if you had rules this severe, you may not want to stay in the teaching profession too many years, especially if you were interested in getting married and having a family. Oh yes, and I do want to point out a couple of teachers here who were expected, like all the teachers, to be pillars of moral perfection. Here's a picture of a bona fide schoolmarm. And I had to go looking, but I had to find out what her shoes looked like, and that's what I could find. And so that's her shoes. And then here is my daughter Sarah pretending to be a schoolmarm and actually doing a very good job of it. So just a couple of pillars of moral perfection that illustrate how the school teachers were at that time. So why were these teachers heroes? To answer this question, I need to tell you why I call Cherry Jackson Kingston now a hero. Cherry was my second cousin, my high school English teacher, and my friend. I knew all the students in her Lincoln School class in 1943 then. I went to high school with them, and I can tell you that they were all successful in life. Knowing Cherry, there's no doubt that she gave those kids a wonderful background upon which to be good citizens and to make a positive difference in their careers. So sometimes you recognize heroes by the results of their efforts. This was the case with Cherry, and I think this was also true of most of the thousands of one-room school teachers across the country. So one-room school teachers were heroes because of the barriers they faced and what they ultimately accomplished. Female teachers had to prove they could handle the 8th grade boys, and they were expected to do everything imaginable in teaching and running their schools, as well as to lead an extremely pious lives to serve as virtuous examples for their students and community. And all this in 1915 for $60 a month for 8 months. More often than not, they met these stringent expectations. As author Wayne Fuller so aptly put it, at the crossroads of the 19th and 20th centuries, it was largely an army of young women, 200,000, so to speak, who went out to slay the dragon of ignorance throughout the nation. They were credited with positively changing the nature of our communities and our education system forever. It was totally a very big deal, an amazing accomplishment, an unbelievable phenomenon. I'd like to go ahead and talk to you a little bit about my experiences at Prairie View School. What was it really like? So to put the finishing touches on the real scoop on the one-room school, I want to tell a few personal stories that I hope will give a flavor of what went on at Prairie View School. First, I'd like to look at my teachers and fellow students. And so here are, here's a picture of my 1942 class. I am in the middle column, the second person from the back. 8-year-old, and Mrs. Ween is back by the piano. and my sister is in the up front left. This is a 1943 class, about the same group. The ratio of students to teacher was about 15-1. Again, I'm in the second middle column, second from the back. This time 9 years old. And finally, this is the 1946 class, and I'm in the back row, far back, first one on the left. And this is Mrs. O'Connor. I remember Prairie View School as being a happy, comfortable place to be, sort of one happy family, and literally that was true because roughly half of each class were my relatives, my cousins, second cousins, and my sister and sister. So let's look at some of my experiences. My first exciting discovery, and very early on, as I set up my little desk working on an arithmetic worksheet, I suddenly discovered that I could eavesdrop on Mrs. Ball over in the corner, teaching the 7th and 8th graders. What they were talking about was interesting to me, and for 8 years I multitasked, listening to other grade level groups while completing my worksheets. With better hearing, I must add, than the young student who, after eavesdropping like me, went home and told her mother that she had learned about the Silver War. You talk about enrichment and meeting individual needs. I was never bored again. First job. When Mrs. Ween, my 5th grade teacher, asked me to come to school early to help her carry cobs and coal to heat up the stove, I was really excited. She paid me 50 cents a week to do it. I felt proud to be chosen. I felt trusted. I felt competent. I felt responsible. I felt satisfaction about success. Come to think of it, that's how I felt later in life about all my other jobs. Teaching life skills and attitudes on my first job. And then there was my early acting career. Mrs. Ween didn't ask me to be in a 2-person Christmas play with my second cousin, Sharon Carr. She just acted as if it was a given, and a hillbilly romantic skit, no less. There was Sharon, my second cousin, and there was me. I received raves from all the parents, and that experience made me want to later take part in high school plays and feel comfortable in front of people. One of the many extracurricular activities at Prairie View School, building confidence and learning how to do things. During the war, we had a scrap metal drive. The dive bombers and the submarines teams competed to help the war effort. I was leader of the dive bombers, organizing the team, planning our collection and delivery schedules, and getting others on my team to collect a lot of scrap. We were the winning team. And in retrospect, I considered it my first successful project experience. Meaningful learning and leadership training through project. What progressive education. I must tell you about my first sex education. One day, not long after I started school, all the boys hightailed it to the outdoor boys' toilet at recess. There, in close proximity to the smelly latrine, I had my first introduction to sex education. I can truly say, looking back, that what I learned about the birds and bees from the boys at Prairie View School was pretty accurate and sufficed until I read certain library books at Illinois State University. Cooperative learning and sex education at the same time. Wow. talk to you about my early taste of competition at Prairie View. Prairie View School, our teacher would have us go to the blackboard and do long arithmetic calculations, like 365 times 27, a ciphering contest, no less. If you finished first, you took your seat and waited for the others. I was hands down the fastest cipherer in the school. When we visited the town school in Weldon and a ciphering contest came up, I thought, no sweat, I always finish first. Lo and behold, each time I was still ciphering away when a slight girl named Ada Catherine Pearl was already sitting down with a big smile on her face. And here's a little picture of Ada Catherine at that time, and there's a little picture of me. I learned humility that day, and that there's always someone in this world who can do something better than you. Active involvement and developing self-knowledge in Prairie View School. Now here's a postscript. Many years later, when I was a professor of mathematics at Illinois State University, my friend Ada Catherine Pearl knocked at my office door. I was very quick to make it clear that under the circumstances, there would be no ciphering contest in the mathematics department that day. And here's a picture of Ada Catherine then and Ada Catherine now, my ciphering nemesis. My first big writing experience. Mrs. O'Connor, my 8th grade teacher at Prairie View School, asked me to stay after school one day, told me that I should enter a 3-county essay contest for 7th and 8th graders that offered a prize of $25 for the winner. I thought I could use 25 bucks, and so I entered. My essay, entitled From Little Acorns Big Oaks Grow, won the contest, and that was printed in full in the Weldon Record, a local paper of some renown. Entering and writing that essay contest probably sowed the seed of interest that launched my career as a writer. Special attention to every student and a teacher who cares. Thank you, Mrs. O'Connor. And finally, my first foreign language, with foreign in quotes. No one probably even considered teaching a foreign language in a one-room school. Deprived of this opportunity, the kids learned a foreign language of their own. Anke uye okte igpe atenle. Say ipel pe anke. Ari say if u atke. Many of you learned talk pig Latin when you were a kid, so you know what I mean. Another, quote, benefit, unquote, of Prairie View School. So we come to the question of how did it all end? As we moved into the 1900s, a lot of people thought that the one-room schools were the greatest thing since sliced bread. A lot of others thought they were woefully inadequate and ineffective. After a time of nationwide educational and political arguments, the second group of people won the day. So by 1938, a year before I went to Prairie View School, 19,000 one-room schools had been abandoned in the Midwest. The exodus had begun. And by 1960, 13 years after I left Prairie View, less than 1% of all schools attended a one-room, or all students attended a one-room school, less than 1%. Tens of thousands of one-room schools, like Prairie View, in this picture, were being demolished. So for 150 years, one-room schools played a major role in cementing communities, furthering democracy, and educating a larger percentage of the student population than in any other country in the world. Then, seemingly in a blink of an eye, they were essentially extinct. And so what's the bottom line? Today, we look back on the one-room school era and give credit where credit is due for the efforts of communities and teachers in providing a good education to a large number of children of our country, including me, I might add. So this old adage certainly rings true for the teachers in the one-room schools. Teachers affect eternity, no one can tell where their influence stops. Sometimes when today's problems seem insurmountable and we have forgotten the severity of the problems of the past, we have this feeling that things were just better back then than they are now. And we are whisked away by nostalgia and the good old days. But then we look at our changing world and some of the wonderful things that are happening in our schools today, and we know that changing times require educational innovation. I think the following quote puts the task and importance of education in perspective. Education is simply the soul of a society as it passes from one generation to another, the soul of the society. So perhaps our schools of education, in preparing curriculum and teachers, are aware of what worked well in the past and are integrating it into their teacher education programs, while at the same time creating and utilizing wonderful new innovative practices for the future. From my 35 years experience as a teacher educator, I have learned to never underestimate what devoted teachers can do. From what I know about teachers today, I have absolutely no doubt that our society's soul and our children's futures are in good hands.